Hey, everybody. As promised, I have more bonus programming for you today. A few months back, my friend Fred and I attempted to launch a new podcast, and the theme was basically about how one thing from history can unexpectedly lead to another. So the theme was kind of his idea, and since I really don't have an extensive knowledge of history myself, I was just basically kind of his sidekick for this project, and I guess I was the producer too, so there you go. So So, phooey. Haters. I have my place in this world. And however, as I said before, Fred is working on getting his PhD, and since that's kind of been overwhelmingly time consuming for him, the history podcast has really been put on the back burner, at least for now, at least for the time being. But we did record 2 episodes, and this is the second one. And I asked Fred if he would just like me to go ahead and release them on this show, and he said yes. They were fun episodes, so I hated to see them go to waste, and maybe there will be a time in the near future where we can revisit the project, but for now, you can enjoy them here on this show. Again, this will be the second of the 2 episodes that we recorded. I hope you enjoy it, and here we go.
The Great Big Intergalactic.
Caesar,
Hey, Fred!
you like birds?
I do like birds. I'm kind of an amateur. I'm not like really into it. I'm not one of those people who walk into the woods and just like obsess over every little noise they hear. Some of those people can kind of get annoying. But back when I lived in Cleveland before I left, I did set up a bird feeder, and I had, some cardinals and blue jays and red-winged blackbirds and just a lot of different birds coming to visit my house. And I just really enjoyed like listening to music in the back lawn and watching these birds. And then, of course, recently I moved to Florida, and they have some of the most almost prehistoric like birds down here. They have anhingas. I don't know if you've ever heard of those.
An anhinga?
Yeah, very weird. They look like a bat with a long neck, and they stretch their arms out to kind of look like the bat signal almost. But they have this long snake-like neck, and they have. I just realized I keep seeing these birds flying up and down the coast, and I asked somebody just today, "What are those things?" And they're like, "Oh, that's a pelican." I'm like, "Oh, of course," just like the New Orleans mascot for their basketball team. And there's something called the white ibis, and this very ugly duck called the Muscovy duck. And it's kind of like it's got this red, fleshy, gross eyeball. I would just say Google it. It's hideous. Like it's kind of like the opposite of the ugly duckling. If you remember that story where it was an ugly duckling, but it grew up to be a beautiful swan. Like a baby Muscovy duck is pretty cute, but it turns out to be this hideous adult. And they have some ospreys and bald eagles up down here too, and it's really just like a lot of different kind of birds down here. And it's really a cool experience.
I really should get more into bird watching, but it's all pretty interesting. Although I'd be pretty bored staring at birds for a couple hours. You go, it's a thing with feathers, and then someone would go, one of the bird enthusiasts would go, how dare you say that, Fred? I'm like, what? It's a bird, it's an animal with feathers. But anyway.
Yes, I think some bird watchers are a little bit too intense, for a lack of a better word.
I guess so. But speaking of intense, though, I have a random question that will be connected in this episode. Don't worry, viewers. I'm just asking these random questions now. They all will connect in due time. But I want to ask you, Caesar, what do you think about church? I know that you are connected yourself to the religious world.
Yeah, I go to church when I'm being good, I guess. I did grow I did grow up in a Baptist church. My parents were members of a Baptist church in small town, rural Ohio. And, it was the kind of church where you would have, like a piano player and, maybe one guy up front singing along, leading the service. And then it's like the old school hymns that were probably like 200 years old, like blessed be the tie that binds, that kind of stuff. Or it is well with my soul, or amazing grace, those ones, just like the old school, just hundreds years old hymns that you'd sing out of a book. And, in modern times, you don't really see that as much, at least in the cities where I live nowadays. You get more of like the full band and the contemporary worship and, like a drummer and a bass player and a guitar player and a keyboards and this big production with lights and everything. And I kind of like both. I kind of sometimes miss the old school version of it, like especially around Christmas time for some reason. It's just got like a traditional feel, I guess. But yeah, that's pretty much my experience with going to church.
Yeah, like I mentioned in the previous episode, I was raised a Christian, but not necessarily with any denomination in mind. So therefore, the church was very, very rare. I went to church with my friends for the Christmas events. But other than that, my parents was like, "Well, believe what you want to believe. We believe that there is a God, but you can believe what you want to." And so it was a very loose household in that sense. But the closest thing I got to a hymn was, have you ever seen that vine of the old parishioners doing a rap? And this is my rap, because Jesus Christ is my certain word that shall not be uttered here because we'd be canceled if we said it. We can use your imaginations. It begins with a certain letter N.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so that's why that's not being mentioned here. But that's the closest that's kind of the one hymn I knew. And then I actually started to attend church from here and there in my college years. But the point is, though, that's interesting enough to hear that, Caesar. Now I got to go to the third question, though, which is, tell me a little bit about your family history. I know you recently been doing some, Ancestry.com or wherever you do 23andMe.
Yeah, actually, my brother has been into looking up our family history. And actually, he kind of avoids those 23andMe type things because he thinks they're kind of intrusive and they're kind of like a data collection agency.
Yeah.
But so he's been trying to do it through other methods. And it's an odd thing because when I first started thinking about my heritage and my ancestry, I really couldn't think much beyond grandma, grandpa, and my other grandmother and my other grandfather. I just kind of thought of their personalities, and I really didn't think much beyond that. I'm like, oh, their grandparents must have been a lot like them, just older versions. And the more I start to look at the family tree, and it goes way back, apparently my family has been around in the United States since probably before the United States existed. I think on both sides. I read once that my last name is the oldest surname that came to America and stuck around, although I have not found evidence to support that. But either way, we've been here for a while in the United States. And the more I looked into it, the more I started to get almost a little creeped out. And I saw all these faceless names on this family tree. And I started to think about, who are these people? Like, I probably have some of their quirks and their personalities, and I never even met these people. And it's like all the things that annoy me about myself and all the things that I like about myself, they probably came from some of those ancestors, and I'm kind of like this soup of good and bad that came from all of these previous generations. And it's, as I look at this tree, I start to think, ooh, I don't know if I would would I like half of these people? And I think, and I'm not a person who really likes people that much. And as I look through the list, I think I probably wouldn't like most of these people. And yet I inherited all of their traits. But to be more specific, before my ancestors came to the United States, it seems like we're probably mostly German. And then I think the other side would probably be British, which you would think that they would have accumulated a lot of wealth being here that early. But if they did not pass it down.
Oh, Caesar. I hate to say it, but how naive of you. The earliest people were the poorest. So many people came here on indentured servitude contracts. Yeah. So there's a chance that maybe some of your ancestors came all the way back in the 17th century. They could have actually technically been servants to somewhat wealthier people in the Americas and would have served a contract where they effectively were just servants without pay. And, so it's interesting that you mentioned this wealth thing. There's not much wealth that comes from families that long ago, unless you already had that money in England.
Before you came here. I thought they would just buy up all the land and because it was probably cheaper back then, right?
Well, there was no law determining what the land cost. So you could own all the land, but it was worth nothing. And plus the natives tribes probably were going there like, I've never seen you here before. Why are you burning that tree? Stop. I will axe you in the face.
Oh, boy.
Well, wasn't that violent, but they have certainly got a little bit testy after like, hey, wait a minute. That's our praying ground. Why are you burning it? It's like for crops. Kind of might make someone angry when your religious grounds get burned to cinders.
And that's what a lot of Ohio is, where my ancestors settled down. You can tell it used to be Native American land because there's Indian mountains everywhere in Ohio.
All over the place.
And Ohio is a Native American name. And where we lived in Cleveland, that Cuyahoga is what did we say that was?
Iroquois
name, yeah. Crooked River.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So now I have to tell all of our listeners here. So why did I ask Caesar all these odd questions about birds, church, and family history? Well, today is going to be a real bit of a wild ride, as it usually is on this podcast. If you've not forgot from the first two episodes, this one today is all about how a man getting thrown out of a window led to the creation of the British Empire, which then led to a real war against birds. And you heard that right, a war against birds. So let's begin with at least the man getting thrown out the window part. We had to travel back to the 15th and 16th century. Martin Luther posts his 99 Theses. The creation of Protestantism starts. The Catholic Church hates this. They are trying to subjugate and get rid of the Protestants in any shape and form. Protestants are getting more popular because, hey, Catholic Church is a little beefy. It's got too much bureaucracy. People like the simplistic angle of the Protestants. A bunch of new denominations pop up. Suddenly, the Protestant church has a lot of power, with even once former Catholic kings converting to Protestantism and suddenly leading Protestant nations. Kind of a big problem. And this is becoming a major issue at the time of the 17th century, particularly in a little land called the Holy Roman Empire. Now, Caesar, where do you think the Holy Roman Empire was?
I think it stretched all the way from Turkey to up to Britain, right? At one point.
Oh, well, that's the Roman Empire. That's the grandfather to the Holy Roman Empire.
Oh, okay.
The Holy Roman Empire is pretty much Germany and Prague and probably throwing a little bit Italy at its height. But technically, it was nowhere. Let me explain. Right. The Holy Roman Empire did exist in terms of technical territory, but the problem was it was a bunch of collected states effectively that declared their own rules. So in other words, there was a Holy Roman Emperor that went, hey, can you do this thing for me? And all the princes would go, no, you're not the boss of me. So technically, the Holy Roman Empire was this thing where it's like they technically had land, but not really, because all the princes just kept saying, you're not the boss of me. It's a very complicated history. I won't go further into it, but basically just think of a very divided Germany, with hundreds of little German principalities and states. It's a nightmare to look at if you see a Holy Roman Empire map.
And what year was this again?
So we're talking about the early 17th century here.
Okay. So this would have been right before my ancestors left Germany.
Right, exactly. So there's a reason why they left. You would too when you don't even know which principality you belong to. You go, which one is it? Franz took over Liba a couple of months ago, but then Franz died, so now it's back to Liba. But Liba got killed by a guy named Dick. So now we don't know who we belong to. We're getting out of here. So then there was, however, one area that was actually kind of distinctly Holy Roman, or one that's definitely controlled, and that was in the area of the Czech Republic, or what is now the Czech Republic. And in particular, the region of Bohemia, which is where a lot of their influence was based. And at one point, I do believe that the empire's capital was located, or one of the major capitals was located in this region. So with the Holy Roman Empire, they're in this weird little problem here, which is half Catholic, half Protestant. There's quite a few Protestants that were in the Holy Roman Empire, actively going against the very Catholic Holy Roman Empire, which is one of the most ardent supporters of Catholicism in Europe at the time. And basically, lots of wealthy Catholic people, lots of wealthy Protestant people equals lots of nasty politics. Lots of nasty politics equals Holy Roman Emperor basically screwing over the Protestant wealthy people, wealthy Protestants, not too happy with wealthy Catholics. Wealthy Protestants go up to the local government and go, you did us wrong. And the local Catholics go, I have no idea what you're talking about. I am just the messenger. Talk to the emperor. And when they didn't get their voice with the emperor, because the emperor said, I am not dealing with those crazy Protestants, the Protestants said, well, the local people will do. Bring us your hide. And suddenly they grab a couple of local Catholic priests and maybe a couple of local Holy Roman officials, and they throw them out of a window. And when they throw them out of a window, you won't believe what they landed on. Do you think A? So I'm going to do a little quick quiz here, Caesar. These people get thrown out of the window. Do you think A, they lived, B, they died, C, they lived, but really embarrassingly survived?
I'm going to go with 3, really embarrassingly survived. Because that would be the most interesting version of this story.
Correct. Good job, Caesar. I'm glad you took my hint. You might think, though, well, how on earth would someone survive getting thrown out of a window and then falling 30 feet, which is where this window was located? Well, they fell into cow manure. Mm. So you have to understand this local little government building, which is in the city of what is now Prague in the Czech Republic, which is the nation's capital of the Czech Republic. With people getting thrown out of this window, they luckily were next to this humongous pile of cow manure, in part because, you need to have a couple of animals to help maintain the whole area, maintain the building, maintain the grounds. Therefore, you kind of had some animal manure all over the place. And what better place to put it than put it outside a window?
There must have been poop everywhere in ancient times, just laying around.
Absolutely. It's disgusting. I mean, I'm going to go a little TMI here, but, before the invention of toilet paper, they sometimes go up there with their hands to get everything out. You think about that. So tell me, so it's not like just animal poop, but human poop is everywhere in every single crevasse of a human being. I'm telling you, when people say, I travel back to the 16th century and fall in love, I'm like, that ain't happening. Because that person's going to smell like poop, and they're going, and there's probably going to be some flies, maybe some jaundice in the hand because they didn't clean it properly, and you're going, it's just too gross. The point is that early times, poop is everywhere. Don't travel back to the medieval times. Stick to around this period. This is the best time for plumbing and also lack of poop.
You probably want to live near a waterfall so you can just let it clean you.
But even then, that was not going to help because the poop would just get into the water and then people were watching it. It basically ain't medieval times, not good for hygiene. Not good for hygiene.
Basically, everywhere in history before modern times, not good for hygiene.
Some civilizations did pretty well with the hygiene, relatively speaking. But then again, they had to take some unusual steps, like the Romans who used urine for mouthwash. I won't get too much more into that.
Yeah. I love modern technology.
Yes.
I think about it quite often, how many things that we have today that I couldn't survive without. And they're all, even 50, 100-year-old technology is pretty great at this point. Like running water, all those things, they're pretty great. And society could collapse and I'd have to have a poopy butt if society did collapse, if the water stopped running, if the shower stopped running, if I couldn't get soap and shampoo at the local store.
It's crazy to think what we take for granted. So what the point though is that these people get thrown into the poop, very embarrassing. It's actually a hilarious picture of this what they call the defenestration of Prague, which is basically this big word for thrown out the window. And when they get through this picture is of these people falling, and there's this mysterious, lovely angel about to catch them, which is this very nice way of saying they got caught by the poop. It's a hilarious picture. I recommend people look it up. You could put in on Google defenestration of Prague painting. You'll find it with the angel, and just know it's just a symbolism for cow shit. Anyway,
Hey,
Now, of course,
just real quick. You were talking about Bohemia, and it's an interesting subject because I think when we think of Bohemian, we think of like what Caribbean, like almost reggae type of thing with the people with the multicolored hats. And
yeah,
but a few years back, I dated a girl, and she said that she was part Bohemian. And I'm like, that's not what I think of as Bohemian. But then I look
right.
back and where's Bohemia at? Was that like
Oh,
Czechoslovakia?
the Czech Republic. Yep. So it's all in that. It's kind of a more mountainous region, I guess you could say. It's not too far away from Prague. I do believe it could be even technically it could incorporate part of Prague. I'm not fully aware. I'm not the best at Czech geography. After all, I'm from the United States. Sorry, but
And I think I looked it up when I was dating her, and it turns out that like just some hippies kind of took on the Bohemian culture and kind of like I think it was New York or San Francisco or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. And so that's why when we think of Bohemian culture, we think of people with the multicolored hats and not necessarily Czechoslovakians.
right. It's kind of interesting how that term's been totally changed. But with people being thrown out the window to the cow poop, unfortunately, a bunch of nations got very angry, including the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor, who said, "We're going to kill the Protestants now." And fortunately for the Protestants, they were wealthy enough and powerful enough to pitch themselves to other Protestant nations and go, "Please save our hides." And the Protestants went, "Gladly, we will gladly save you for Germany and for that lovely Czech Republic land." Oh, but it's mostly to save you, but it's also about the land. So suddenly you have a bunch of Catholic nations getting involved because they don't want the Holy Roman Empire to collapse and they don't want another Protestant nation to suddenly pop up at their front step. And suddenly you have a bunch of European nations all getting involved in this, what's going to be called the 30 Years' War. This is like the first major European conflict. It's kind of like, it's basically it's a couple of centuries for the First World War and the Second World War. But think about this 30 Years' War is kind of a similar magnitude, at least at the time. It's the biggest war that has ever been seen at that time, outside of some of the wars in China and India, but those are not necessarily been covered yet. And no one really knows about those wars yet because there's kind of history is a little bit lost up until recently, but this was a huge conflict. It was the biggest conflict of the 17th century. That tens of thousands, 100,000 soldiers get involved. But funny enough, one little nation decided, we're not going to get involved with this. You want to take a guess as to who that was, Caesar?
I don't have a guess.
Great Britain.
Oh,
Great Britain said, we're both Protestant and Catholic. Our Anglican church takes properties from both. So we cannot go to war with either because it'd be violating of the holy brothers of both sects, and they are both our brothers. So they mostly kind of stay out of this war, maybe throwing some indirect money to the Protestants and Catholics here and there, just to kind of beef up their allies and not look like they're completely unremoved. But by the end of this war, which is 30 years, Germany's devastated. The Czech Republic is devastated. Sweden loses a king, and Sweden loses a lot of troops. Spain loses a lot of troops. France loses a lot of troops. Pretty much every single major European power loses a lot of men, a lot of arms. And for Central Europe, it is absolutely decimated by war. It's 30 years we're talking about, with people burning crops, destroying lives, killing citizens. It's devastating. But for good old Britain, nothing changed. Suddenly, there's a power vacuum. Suddenly, Great Britain goes, boy, here we go ahead and do some shipping. Let's go send out some ships, get back some, get a profit. And suddenly, Great Britain becomes a world power following the conclusion of this war, in part because everyone else was weak. France had internal problems. Spain had internal problems. Great Britain, some problems here and there, issues with the monarchy, but pretty much they had a system. Internally, they were about as solid as anyone else in the continent. Suddenly, Great Britain becomes this powerhouse. They start developing the colonies more. They start to conquer more land. They start to go war with these various different European powers. Suddenly, they are the big bully because they are not the ones destroyed by this 30-year conflict. Suddenly, they're the ones deciding who becomes king of certain European lands because, again, they are the ones untouched by conflict.
That seems to be a theme in history where if you can avoid war, then you are able to progress a lot faster.
Well, absolutely. I think a great phrase to summarize it all would be, war is great business, for those who do not get involved with it. Because those who get involved with war will start asking those not damaged by war to help them. And so this is very much the case with Great Britain, where it's because of this power vacuum that they become the big benefits of this 30 years war. And with that, we get the creation of this seafaring empire. We get this official establishment of the 13 colonies. We get this conquest of certain lands all around the world, and we get the British Empire as we know it. And because of this creation, we now get to this big problem. Lots of land, but not enough people. What do you do with this land? Well, if you're Great Britain, just throw the prisoners out to the colonies. If they die, so be it. If they live, though, give them their freedom and establish a colony. And so often what happened would be they'd create what are called penal colonies. And it's only penal in the sense that they send the prisoners out and they go, oh, lads, if you can create a colony, you're free. If not, too bad. You're going to die. Uh-huh. And of course, the prisoners wanted to live. They didn't want to live with debts or prison sentences. So a lot of them created colonies. And one particular penal colony becomes a very famous colony and a very famous nation. A couple of prisoners get sent out into the middle of the Pacific, or rather to the southern edge of the Pacific. They go, all right, try and create a colony for us. Where do you think this little colony might be?
Would this be Australia?
Oh my God, hit the nail on the head.
All right.
Yes, it is indeed Australia. This is perhaps the most famous penal colony in the British Empire, outside of some of the American colonies, which quite a few of them are penal, but we're not going to get into that. Australia is created and it becomes this major colony for the British Empire. It's a nice little place where you can dock your ships and then continue your shipping all around the Pacific, but also conduct some nice trade, particularly since it's closer to some of the East Asian markets. Think of Indonesia, think of Japan, think of China, which offer lots of trading opportunities. And thusly, Great Britain becomes this enormously wealthy enterprise. And now we have to fast forward a little bit. Now we're talking about boring British Empire history, which is British Empire goes to land, goes to a nation, goes, hey, we'll make a trade. Then they lie to you. Then they decide to kill you. And then they go, well, now we have a colony here to civilize you all. That's basically the big chunk of British history for 300 years following the 30 Years' War, outside of a couple of insurrections like the American Revolution, which leads to the creation of new nations.
You know, I was talking earlier about how I wasn't sure how I'd feel about some of my ancestors. Imagine what it would be like growing up in Australia, knowing that your ancestors were all criminals who got a second chance.
That'd be kind of cool. But at the same time, if you're like, oh, yeah, you know, Ancestor John murdered a kid. Yeah. Probably should have stayed in the prison.
Did he pass those qualities down to me kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, you kind of wonder, like, it's a little bit iffy. But hopefully, hopefully you got a couple hundred years to wash out that ugly part of the DNA. So then we get to the founding of Australia, which is in the 20th century. And now Australia is an independent nation. Now you have all these Australian colonists descended from the British. And one of the big economies in Australia is farming. What comes with farming, though, in Australia, though, are big, big birds. Have you heard of the likes of the emu, Caesar?
Isn't that like on an insurance commercial recently?
Yes, Liberty. Yes. So for those who do not know, think of the Liberty Mutual commercial with the guy with the yellow shirt, and the guy's like, where the guy said, Liberty Mutual, you get what you need. And there's that bird that next to him, that's an emu. And so you can also just look up Liberty Mutual bird, and you'll get the image of an emu. And that's what we're dealing with here. So in Australia,
or you could just Google emu and
that too.
Keep Liberty Mutual out of it.
That's right.
We're becoming an advertisement for it.
That's right. Liberty company. Mutual are sponsored by Liberty Mutual Insurance.
Please send us money.
That's right. But the point is that these emus unfortunately love to eat crops. And because they eat these crops, Australian farmers go, what in the world? Why are they eating my crops? This is outrageous. So I start to develop fences. That didn't work. The emus are tall. They're big. They just go over the fences. Then they eat the crops. It becomes a problem. There's suddenly not enough wheat for the country, or not enough wheat to ship out to international buyers to make money. So now the Australian farmers say, we need to kill these birds. Thusly, an Australian military officer says, we'll conduct a military operation against these emu.
Oh, wow. Man versus emu.
Thusly, we get the infamous Emu War, which is a real thing you
Wow.
can look up. And this is where we connect our birds into this whole story.
Hmm.
And the Australians decide to set up, they bring machine guns. They bring armored vehicles to try and take out these birds. And what's amazing is, guess who won?
The emus?
The emus won.
Yes! I was rooting for them.
So I'll have to explain what happened. Because it's the early 20th century, so this war happens in the, let's say 1920s and 30s. My brain's unfortunately fogging a little bit on the exact year, but it's right in that span of the 1920s and 30s. Weapons aren't super advanced, although they're advanced enough. They fire machine guns into these emus. They eat the bullets, and they just keep running. It seems like these emus just are impossible to take down, in part because emus are a very hardy species, plus their feathers are a little bit tougher than they look. Nice little Kevlar armor, if you will.
Mm.
And because these emus are able to eat these bullets and keep running away, the Australians have to keep chasing them. And because they have to keep chasing them, unfortunately, their vehicles start to break down because we're talking about the outback here, folks. This is some rough terrain to go around and try and kill these emus that are eating these plants. Suddenly, the Australian vehicles start to overheat. One particular Australian vehicle, if I recall correctly, flipped over upside down because they just were trying to chase after these birds, and suddenly they hit a wrong turn, and the thing flips over. They have to escape. The machine is totaled. Suddenly, you have a bunch of Australian soldiers in the middle of the outback looking at a bunch of emus going, oh my God, the emus beat us.
And according to the internet, an average emu is 5'7" and about 110 to 121 pounds.
It's a big bird. It's a tough bird. It's not easy to get by. And plus, these emus run fast. So in other words, you have to make sure you hit it, because if you don't kill it, it's going to run away and you ain't going to get it. So because of all these advanced tactical maneuvers by these emu, basically just running away from the bullets, the Australian soldiers are just getting tired. They quit. They stop after a couple of weeks, and they come back again, much the same failures. And what eventually causes this emu war to end is a bunch of nations from around the world heard about this war against the birds, and they went, you got to be kidding. That has to violate some international law. That's animal cruelty to the highest degree. And of course, every other nation agreed that this was animal cruelty. Australia doesn't want the heat, the international heat coming from all their fellow compatriot nations. And they said, all right, we have to end this now, mate. But we got to quit the attacking the emus. This thing is over. This operation is finished. And thusly, the emu wars come to an end after, I think, under a year of operation.
I wouldn't want to start a war with any of these Florida birds. They look like dinosaurs down here.
Exactly.
Like pterodactyls.
Oh, okay. That's pretty terrifying.
Have you seen Jurassic Park 3 where they carry that kid off and take him to the nest
Oh, no.
to feed the babies? Oh, I don't want that one to happen to me. I'm surprised the emus didn't do that.
Oh, the emus, unfortunately, they're land birds, so they can't quite fly. But
Yeah.
can you imagine, though, the whole thing about Florida man starts a war of birds and the birds carry him off? I could imagine that being some news in Florida. All I want to hope for is that it's not you who's doing that on the news, Caesar, but it sounds like you're wise enough not to do that. Maybe because you're not from Florida.
Right.
Shots fired. So that basically is this crazy story about how a man getting thrown into cow manure led to the rise of the greatest seafaring empire we know, combined with a actual war against birds. You never know what's going to happen with history. Who would have thought that a man getting thrown into cow manure would lead to a dominant superpower, along with a bunch of Australians going, we need to kill these birds with machine guns. And somehow those Australians failed. The point is, history is wild, it's unpredictable, but it's oh so beautiful. And that's why such a podcast like this exists, because without us rambling about these weird little connections, perhaps your day wouldn't be as bright, wouldn't be as weird. And who knows? Maybe you could take this information that we gave you today and you can spread it with your friends, and you too could be that weird history buff that everyone goes, yeah, ask him that question. Ask him or her that question. They know everything about history.
All because they listen to us.
That's right. Thank you again, listeners, for episode 3, and we'll catch you for episode 4.
Later. Thanks for listening to the show. The Great Big Intergalactic can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, Apple iTunes, and anywhere else that podcasts can be heard. If social media is your thing, you can follow the program on Facebook or Twitter. If you enjoy the show, upvote, share, like, and subscribe. Whenever and wherever those things can be done. If you'd like to send feedback, the easiest way to do that is to email the show at tgbiuniverse@gmail.com, TGBI as in the Great Big Intergalactic, or you can leave a voicemail at 216-200-7940. Contributions could include written feedback, audio submissions, voicemails, or potentially even live guests. It was great having you today, and see you next time.